We're live.
Well, I just want to say thank you to those of you who are able to attend in person today. We will be recording today's presentation so that we can share it and allow other people to watch it that aren't able to attend in real time. But I want to give a special thank you to Cade, who is able to join us today and is able to present on this topic. I also want to give a special thank you to Benjamin Taylor, who is on and able to help with any tech support or tech issues that we have today. So thank you, Benjamin, for being here. So I want to introduce Cade Brownell. He is a school psychologist with expertise in the development, evaluation, and continuous improvement of the multi-tiered systems of support, both at the district and the building level. He's developed experience serving diverse student populations in his tenure with Union Public Schools. He's also further expanded his system level work over the past 2 years as a consultant with the OSU Bridge Center. So his work focuses on strengthening the implementation practices and supporting that data-based decision making and building sustainable frameworks that improve our student outcomes. So in today's session, Cade is going to examine the role of implementation fidelity in school-based practices. And participants are able to explore those practical tools for self-assessment and learn some strategies for developing actionable improvement plans to strengthen that effectiveness of their sustainability of their systems. And today's presentation also aligns with a module that we have on OK Connect. So if you're new to the community of practice, we do have a module that you're able to access and follow on OK Connect. And one of the core components of that talks about this implementation. And I also encourage you to go back and watch our webinar or a community of practice from last month that focused on that teaming. So we want to make sure that we're supporting you at all levels of your implementation. But without further ado, I want to turn it over to Cade Brownell and let him kind of further introduce himself and just share his knowledge and wisdom with us.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Shepard, and hello to everybody joining today and watching online later. I'm very, very pleased to be able to present with you today and share some information. I have found a passion in this area, which was unexpected for me. Early in my career, didn't necessarily think that I would be super excited to talk about the subject matter that we're talking about today, but I am, and I am because of work experience. I was a school psychologist at Union Public Schools, as Dr. Shepard mentioned, and I was able to experience some success there, all due to leadership that I got to work with, both at the building and district level, and them giving me the opportunity to try things, put things in place, strengthen things that were already there, and continue to evaluate, and all for the goal of improving outcomes for our students. And so some of the things that we did worked, some of the things that we tried did not work. And it's important to know when things work and do not work, because we simply put, we don't have time to waste or the resources to waste in supporting our students. It's utterly important for us to be efficient in how we're doing so. So without further ado, we'll get into our content today. Today I am talking about everyone's favorite F word, which is fidelity, of course. So we're going to talk through fidelity. Benjamin, could you give me a thumbs up if you are seeing the slides on screen? Thank you, sir. All right. So as we're talking about fidelity, I want to talk through some fidelity tools. Early in my career, I will be transparent with you and say that I was not super familiar with a lot of formal fidelity tools. So I'm going to talk with you today about some formal fidelity tools, but then also informal ways of measuring fidelity. So before we jump into those tools, though, it's important to set some groundwork. So importantly, what is Fidelity to begin with? So Fidelity then refers to how closely prescribed procedures are followed, and in the context of schools, the degree to which educators implement programs, assessments, and implementation plans the way they were intended. Kind of a lot to unpack there with just that textbook definition of what fidelity is. But implementing programs, what does a program mean? Kind of a scope and sequence of instruction and all those different things. Assessments, we call out assessments here in the definition of fidelity. If we're not implementing an assessment as it's designed to be implemented, we can also find what I often say is paint a false story, paint a false picture for a student's data or a system's data or performance. Also implementation plans. So when we think about a problem-solving model, which I'm sure we talk about often in this group, but implementation plans, a problem-solving model, we're working through implementing a previously prescribed and thought out and planned process, and so we want to be able to implement those the way that we designed them. And that word intended there is also important because sometimes we can get off track a little bit. We can have the best intentions for implementing some procedure, but if it's not tied directly to the need, or where maybe we're pivoting and we're not completing all components of an intervention or something for the best intentions of being efficient with time or something along those lines, we could actually create inefficiencies or just not have the effectiveness that we would like. So as we talk through today, I want you to think about the example of kind of baking. It's kind of a natural example, I think, of when we think about prescribed plans and fidelity, because you can have probably some personal experience. I know for sure I have plenty of personal experience of baking, cooking in general, where something sounds easy and you go in and you implement, and maybe it doesn't go as you intended. So oftentimes what we say to teachers or interventionists is basically, hey, go do this intervention. And that's the guidance that they have. Or maybe we don't even say, do this intervention. We might just say, hey, they're struggling in reading, go intervene. And it's really, really important. Today, I'm not focusing on how do we get to that point of deciding an intervention, but once we have decided an intervention, it's important for us to do that with implementing all the steps that we are able to. So as we think through, actually, let me go back, because I'll give another example here. I'm not out of time yet. We'll see how my timing goes. But I like this. So this picture is from the show, the Junior Bake Off. I don't know if you all watch any baking shows or these Food Network type of shows, but my wife and I enjoy watching the Great British Baking Show. I knew I was going to stumble over that. It's harder to say than you think. The Great British Baking Show is a really fun. It's competitive, but it's not like a cutthroat competitive game show. But in this show, they have several different events on each episode where these experienced bakers, some of them semi-professional, a lot of them just very experienced hobbyists, they have different challenges. And one of those challenges is they are shown an example of a dessert to make, and they're told what it is, and they're given incomplete instructions, and they're just kind of left out to figure it out for themselves. And these are very experienced bakers. Some of them are able to figure it out, no problem. That's within their repertoire. Others look at it and go, I don't know where to start, even for very experienced bakers. So I want you to kind of think about that as we go through the content as well. Maybe you are in a position where you are super familiar with intervention components and measuring fidelity at a district level, intervention level, building level. maybe you're super familiar with that, maybe you're not, or maybe you're somewhere in between. So think through kind of that example as we walk through as well. So why is Fidelity important? It's important for us, again, to be able to guide our teaching staff, our intervention staff, to be able to implement things to have the most effectiveness for our students. It's important to have something like a baking book. I like the kind of tagline at the bottom of that baking book example. It says "Baking Demystified." A lot of times we have some mystique within interventions, and the students just go to the reading specialist or the reading interventionist, and then they just learn how to read, and that's what we think an intervention is. And of course we know that that's not necessarily the case. There's a very specific regimen that the students are working through to learn those reading skills. So again, just to continue building on the why of treatment fidelity, evaluation of intervention outcome for a student. So high levels of intervention fidelity are a necessary but not only sufficient requirement for evaluating student outcomes. Without known fidelity, we cannot evaluate the intervention as well. And so we add that second line there, that second bullet point of evaluating the intervention, to go back to what I said at the very beginning of we want to be able to evaluate interventions, because if an intervention is not working typically, then we need to cast that one out of our repertoire and do another research-based intervention, or perhaps we need to ask some further questions of, are we implementing that intervention as designed? I didn't say this at the beginning, but I do also, I always want to encourage you all when we go through these kind of virtual presentations, if you can find your raising your hand button, it's at the top of the screen on Microsoft Teams. Also, you can find the react button and give thumbs up and questions or anything like that as well. So feel free to do that throughout the course of my presentation today. Be happy to interact. And I know Benjamin will help me out monitoring the chat if there's anything put into the chat as well. So continuing on then with why do we need to ensure high levels of treatment fidelity? We need to examine the overall effectiveness of any intervention we use regularly, and does it work for most students. So again, if the intervention is not working for most, especially if we're thinking like that tier 2 level, then we need to use something else. If it's only working for very few under very specific set of contexts, then maybe that's a tier 3 intervention, but we need to have something that is effective for most students. Most importantly, every child deserves our best shot at success. I believe this to my core, and I think it should guide everything that we do as educators. It is not okay to implement just some of the intervention or implement it just some of the time. An intervention, a good evidence-based, research-based intervention has a lot of data to support its effectiveness, and it's designed in a certain way for a very specific reason. And so if we try to just use components of it, we're possibly undoing the very things that make it the most effective. And I used to, so as the lead school psychologist at Union Public Schools, I got to supervise and guide the other school psychologists on staff. We had about a dozen or so, depending on the year, but I got to guide them. And then what I also really loved was I got to get in the same room with my other school psychologists, but then also interventionists at the building level a couple of times a year. And I got to really walk through the whys of intervention, the hows of intervention, the data collection, all of that good stuff. And we really got to spend time working with the people who are actually implementing the interventions. And I said often to that group that, implementing these interventions, especially if that's all you do all day, every day, it's not the most exciting thing because the interventions are typically, high repetitiveness, very specific skills, and those types of things, very highly regimented. So it's not the most exciting thing, but it's really, really important to do that work and to be able to stick with what is prescribed, what is planned, what has been researched to show that it's most effective with most students. Okay, so moving into how do we monitor and track integrity? Incredibly important there. I mentioned some formal and informal. We have indirect and direct. So indirectly, you could monitor integrity by reviewing permanent products for evidence. I'm going to share a lot of examples from my work experience, but another one is this need for reviewing permanent products or just even producing permanent products. I'll be honest that when I started, I worked in quite a number of different buildings throughout the district over my time there, and there's one interaction that really kind of stands out to me. Where I kind of thought to myself, man, I'm needed here. I need to get things in gear and really help support this staff, because I had this interaction with an interventionist who was working her tail off, had the best intentions of supporting students and their ability to learn how to read, but the intervention was just really lacking. She did not have guidance previously on what interventions to implement or why or how to go about doing it, for how long, and collecting data and any of that stuff. She was really just told, hey, the student needs intervention, go. And she did not have adequate training or support to experience success. And so, in that situation, there were no permanent products that were produced, not even attendance. And so she just kind of met with students as she was told to. When they were there, when there was a space available, she didn't have a designated space for her to even work in to meet with these students. And so it was just a really challenging situation for her to be able to support students. And so one of the things that I wanted to implement pretty quickly was obviously support and give interventions and those kind of things. But as I'm supporting her, just to kind of make sure that we're trending in the right direction, hey, these interventions are going to have some kind of output. They're going to have a permanent product of the different trials that you go through, and we're going to collect some information on the student performance of what exactly do they need, what are they, what skills are they not able to master, kind of a screening as far as intervention is concerned. But then also I'm keeping track of, are we progressing in those skills? And so we were able to implement that and showed obviously a lot more improvement than the lack of a plan previously. So I'm thinking about what kind of footprints does the intervention leave behind? Well, just using reading or even behaviors as an examples, you can start to see these smaller behaviors, these building block behaviors or skills that are beginning to form that allow future skills. So kind of that instructional hierarchy, we can see evidence of that. Moving into directly though, so how do we directly track integrity? Is a little bit more formal usually. So you can do observations or walkthroughs. Just go see for yourself. So if you're in a leadership position, this is something that's incredibly important to do, in my opinion. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of this direct or observation walkthrough stuff a little bit later. But I think it's just so important to show up and just be there for the people that are doing the work. So a walkthrough or observation doesn't have to be a big scary thing for the people that you're working with. It should really be something there that's intended to celebrate their work and provide some support on ways that can be improved. Okay, so I'm going to start a little bit broader here as we talk about actually measuring the fidelity. And so I'm going to start kind of more systems framework process than specific intervention fidelity. So we want to make sure that the framework is in place to implement interventions. As I mentioned in my example of the interventionist who had the best intentions but didn't have the support, there was not a framework in place to really implement those interventions well. So let's talk more about what I mean by that. If we go back to the example of baking, we're thinking about things like we're talking about the kitchen right now, right? So if we have the components of the kitchen to successfully bake? Okay, so evaluating the fidelity of implementation. So fidelity checks for teaming structure. Teaming structure is incredibly important. This is an evaluation of if you have the proper kitchen to do the baking. Do we have the tools, the resources, and the structures for implementing MTSS within your building or your district? Sometimes the answer to that is no, and we then create some action plans. But you likely are going to want to have a more formal tool to evaluate this because, again, you might be sitting here thinking, yep, I am 100% locked in. I know what each of these components are that we need to have in place. But you've also, you're going to be working with people who do not know, or maybe you yourself don't know, or again, maybe somewhere in the middle. So it's really, really helpful to evaluate the fidelity of implementation to see, do we actually have these components? And sometimes throughout this process, you find out components that you didn't even know about. And sometimes we can see that these things that seem so simple are actually kind of complicated because the devil is in the details of these kind of big overarching ideas of what MTSS is. So foundational components of frameworks such as MTSS involve the integration of ongoing monitoring of implementation fidelity to assess the presence of programmatic features that make up such approaches. So a way to evaluate the kitchen through our example, I have really grown to love this school-wide positive behavior intervention and supports tiered fidelity inventory, the TFI, you might hear it referred to. You may have heard about it before, maybe you've used it before. This was, to be honest with you, something that I wasn't familiar with early on in my career, and gosh darn it, I wish I was, because it would have made life a lot easier where I self-made some things, whereas this has been really developed and data collected on it for quite a long time. I believe there's actually a new version, an updated version that is released just in the last year or so. But this is 2.1 freely available. You can Google it and find it. But this is a really great resource to get started evaluating your kitchen. So do we have even that essential bakeware? Do we have something to put these interventions in to be able to implement them, let alone implement them exactly as designed? So this formally evaluates if components of the multi-tiered process are in place. It's usually conducted through a team process of self-evaluation. This is a critical piece of any assessment of your tiered framework. If one person is completing it, you're probably not implementing MTSS very well. This is intended to be a team process where you have people from multiple different positions that are offering their perspectives, their data. You're bringing data to this process as well. Do we have permanent products to be able to show? So this, again, this is critical that it's a team process of self-evaluation, helpful to eliminate bias, again, because us as leaders, often within a building, we may think that something is going well and it's not, or vice versa. And so just critical that it is a team process. I'm passionate about that piece, if you can't tell. It can be helpful to have an external coach work with the team to complete the evaluation as well. For similar reasons. Sometimes our perspective is just maybe not quite reality, and we need somebody that has no ties, no bias towards anything within the system, to just evaluate and just give the unfiltered truth of how things are being implemented. Also very helpful to oftentimes to say, actually, no, you are doing this component and you're doing it really well. You're just calling it something different. So connecting that language, as probably we've all encountered, just the terminology that's used between the 100 different self-help books that you can buy on implementing MTSS at any given time. Just the language might be different, and so maybe an external coach, where as a team you're saying, yeah, we're not really doing this at all, and an external coach might come in and say, well, what about this thing that you talked about a little bit ago? You seem to be implementing that pretty well. Is that not the same thing? And just kind of merging those two ideas. So the idea also is that this is conducted 2 or 3 times per year. So really think about this as a universal screening. And for universal screening for our students, we want to monitor their progress. We want to raise that red flag or the green flag, depending upon their progress. That way we can identify those students or those component areas of our framework that need some more attention. But we also want to track progress over time. Importantly, it's also used to develop action steps for improving the system. So we never want to stop at collecting data and saying, yep, you know what, there's a problem. That's not where we want to be, because that doesn't really serve to benefit any students. And our goal, if our goal is to truly do whatever we can to support students, then we need to develop action steps for improving whatever component that we identified as lacking or needing some additional support. So some other programmatic fidelity assessments, mentioned the TFI, talking through that. So, I mean, you can call me a windmill because I'm a big fan of the TFI. There's also DSFI, sorry, and then the RTFI, and then the OKMTSS fidelity. So let's talk through each of these a little bit more. So with the tiered fidelity inventory, there's different sections of it. So if you were to download the PDF of the TFI and just kind of scroll through it, you might think, gosh, this is pretty overwhelming. I don't know if we can actually implement this. However, you should know that you can break it down into different sections. You've got your tiers 1, 2, and 3 that you can do both in combination or separately. I just in my practice as a consultant coming into districts, I always just start with tier 1 and I see where we're at. I see let's do this small chunk first. Let's see what systems we have in place. And then we can go from there. Next time, maybe we do tier 2 in addition to tier 1. Maybe we just need to focus on tier 1 for a while and really create some action plans to improve things or strengthen things within our framework at the tier 1 level. So each of these has different items that you are rating, that you score from 0 to 2, and there is specific criteria for each score. And so the criteria is very descriptive of, you either have this in place or you don't, essentially. And it's prompting for different permanent products that could be used to prove essentially whether or not that practice is actually in place. So again, you can break it down. If you're good on tier 1, you've done it before, and your data indicates that, hey, things are really going well. We're getting 2s on every item. Then your data is telling you that it's time to move to tier 2 or even tier 3 framework and see how you're performing there. So use your data just like any other universal screening. Use that data to guide your additional assessment. And you may not need to do additional assessment. That may be sufficient, or your data might be saying, hey, let's focus on this area and maybe we need to do a little bit more assessment. So again, this is really looking at, do we have the ovens, the vent hoods, the lighting, the work surfaces? Do we have all of these things in place to be able to not only just teach the student how to read, just to make brownies really well, but do we have the flexibility there through an MTSS framework? Do we have the flexibility there that, hey, we need to make cookies and brownies at the same time, and whatever this fancy looking cake is on the right side of the screen, do we have the ability to have more sophisticated work as well? So you could be thinking of this as, do we have the capacity and the framework and the resources to implement tiers 1, 2, and 3 fully to their full extent all at one time? Or do we need to continue to build and bring in some more components, create some investments so that we have our Dutch ovens to be able to put things in the oven and bake them appropriately? Okay. So to get more specific, though, the Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory, RTFI, obviously very similar, coming from the same creation there. So this one also has sections: universal tier 1 reading components, and then those sections for your advanced tiers 2 and 3. So again, very similar, scoring 0 to 2 with that specific criteria for each score, and implementation by building type. And so just kind of as a disclaimer, we're all pretty familiar with the fact that there's MTSS related, there's a lot more developed resources for elementary than there are for secondary, and that's just the nature. That's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. However, there are resources that are available to help support and guide secondary implementation, and this is one. I can talk about secondary implementation the rest of the session as well, because I'm also passionate about the need and the ability to support secondary. But just know that this can also help address secondary. If I'm not mistaken, it goes up to 8th grade, so not quite high school, but don't quote me on that one. I invite you to look through the RTFI for yourself to find out. But again, this is a little bit more specific. So how good can we get at baking bread? Do we have all the components, all the tools, everything necessary to bake really, really good bread? How can we support reading really, really well? Oftentimes schools place an extra emphasis on supporting reading instruction because their students are struggling to read. And so this is a very specific tool to support. You also have available to you the OKMTSS Fidelity Assessment. So this has multiple different sections again. So a similar creation there where it's got universal screening, progress monitoring, data decision making, multi-level prevention system, meaning tiers 1, 2, and 3, the infrastructure and support mechanisms there as well. So on this one, the scoring is a little bit different. It's scores from 1 to 5 rather than from 0 to 2. And it's kind of specified in there that scores of 4 and 5 require evidence. So if we're going to claim a 4 and a 5, let's prove it. But then also, if we're truly meeting that, we're going to have those permanent products that are available to support those practices being in place. This also includes implementation by subject area, so literacy, math, and behavior included within this as well. Important to note for the TFI, not the reading TFI, but the other TFI, it's very behavior focused. So that one is going to be kind of framework. Is the framework in place for MTSS, but it's going to be looking a little bit more at the behavior area. The OKMTSS has implementation by each of these 3 subject areas. So again, this OKMTSS one, because it integrates reading, math, behavior, going back to our example, this is like Panera Bread restaurant where you walk in, you think we just have bread, but no, you've got pasta, you've got cookies, you've got soups, you've got breakfast burritos, which not sure how that fits into their target audience, but hey, you've got a lot of flexibility in the menu. They've got the ability to make several different types of dishes, as well as desserts and those types of things. So they've got the OKMTSS assessment. It's broader. It's more encompassing of all of these other component areas that you can assess. Okay, so moving again to a district systems fidelity inventory. This one has even more sections to it. So leadership teaming, stakeholder engagement, funding, and alignment, which we haven't talked about the funding as much yet, but obviously very important. Policy, workforce capacity, training, coaching, evaluation, and local implementation demonstrations. This one is very, very important, especially if you are at a leadership position within your district and you really, really want to advocate for increasing the support of implementing an MTSS framework. The ability to provide some objective data on do we have funding and alignment to support this? The answer might be no. And so there you need to have some advocacy there with your school board or your district leadership to see what can we do to problem solve funding to be able to support full implementation. Oftentimes we see school board policy changes that are necessary as well. And so this is really something that can be interesting to work through. Again, you may be super familiar with your school board policies, or you may have never read them at all in your life. And so sometimes what we find is that through some of these policies that maybe were put in 1975 and they haven't been updated since then, maybe they're working against us, or maybe they're just not fully allowing for the full implementation that we know that can happen. Often discipline policies or things like that would be some more examples. Workforce capacity, of course, as well. This is where your teaching staff is really going to hopefully get some buy-in to this whole thing, because you're going to be looking at things like do my teachers have the ability within their day to actually implement interventions and the assessments needed and those types of things, or are we so restrictive in our classroom structure that they don't have the flexibility to be able to do that. And so helping structure classroom, or maybe even reduce some of that structure for the teachers to be able to get in there and do what they do best. So this can be a tool to increase your buy-in as well. When we think about this with all these different sections, these component areas that it's looking at, I think of this is like prime time 1990s, early 2000s mall, where we've got Panera Bread that's a part of it. We've got our staff, we've got our accounting division, we've got the money there to be able to support these things. You've got a movie theater, you've got your Legos, your toy stores, you've got all of these things within this system, all working together. Unfortunately, we don't get to see this great example all that often anymore. The malls are hard to keep sustaining, but this is a great prime 1990s, 2000s mall example. Again, once we do these fidelity measures, we don't ever want to just stop there. We want to review those results of these fidelity measures. So we typically want to present in a graphical format, divided by different components and tiers of support. So if we're for the TFI example, if we're just taking tier 1, then okay, let's only address tier 1. Let's break it, label whatever graphics visual that we're presenting. This is just for tier 1, making that very clear. And then, just identifying those specific components within. So typically evaluating the overall percentage of components that are in place and comparing results across the year from one year to the next. So this is really a really pretty easy, streamlined way to present the information. Do we have the teaming structure in place? Meaning, do we have our scheduled data team meetings where we're reviewing our universal screening data, we're assigning students to intervention groups, and then we're monitoring the intervention progress? Do we have those meetings even scheduled? Do we have agendas that we actually follow during those meetings? All of that kind of thing. So teaming, do we have, what percentage of those items do we have? If it's 15% in the fall and we continue to do the fidelity measure throughout the year another couple of times for 3 times total, then what is our percentage in the winter and the spring? If we stayed at 15% implementation, then we need to get some more things changed. But oftentimes you can see, nope, we just made some often small tweaks, and rather than 15% where we were in the fall and the spring, maybe we're looking at 55%, and we've got a plan for next fall to be able to improve further. So important to compare those results, not only across the year, but from one year to the next, and just keeping track of that. Another thing that I'm passionate about within our practice is that we just don't celebrate success as much as we should. And so this is an opportunity to be able to celebrate some success, the progress, really focusing on the progress of what we're implementing. And also very importantly, though, is this data is used to prioritize goals in building your framework. We all know that when we do a universal screening measure, whether it's academics for a student or a fidelity of implementation of MTSS at the district level, it's really easy to get overwhelmed with the amount of things that we want to improve. But through all of these tools, we want to prioritize those goals to continue building a framework. We can't choose all of them, and so we need to choose maybe one or two that we can realistically make progress towards. And so these provide the data to help us identify what goals should be prioritized. So this is just an example. I already talked through what this what this could look like, but this is an example where we're maybe measuring all 3 tier component areas on the TFI. And so we did the TFI twice in this school year, and we did tiers 1, 2, and 3. And so why did we do tiers 2 and 3? If we look at the green bar, we're up over 75% of implementation there. And so the data would indicate, okay, we're doing pretty good there. Let's also look at tier 2. We were up over 50% at tier 2. Would like that to be better, but still not horrible. And so we're also looking at tier 3 as well. Maybe some of those systems are mirrored from tier 2 and tier 3. So if we had our data at tier 1, if that green bar was at 25%, we would probably just do tier 1 and let's shore up tier 1 before moving on to even looking at tier 2 and tier 3. So again, tier 1 subscale. So this is just getting more specific in there. So the percentage of points, again, just a really simple way of showing a visual to represent the data. What percentage of points did we get for team, for implementation, evaluation on tier 1? So these are just different component areas, subscales of the TFI. Again, within the TFI, this is an example. This is actually a direct screenshot from their packet of support. So an action plan. On the far left, it shows that subscale of the different areas. And so for teams, you have team composition. So who is making up this team? What staff positions? And that's going to be flexible, obviously, depending upon who's in your building. But who is making up this team? And then those operating procedures. Do we have an agenda? Those things like that. Implementation, again, because this is the TFI, and if you remember, I said it's a little bit more focused on behavior. So it has things like behavior expectations. Do we even have those identified? And then do we teach those expectations? So those really specific pieces there that we can pull out and say, you know what, we don't have clearly identified behavioral expectations. That's something that we should focus on. And so obviously you can kind of work through in a hierarchical model here of if we don't have behavioral expectations, but we also don't have professional development over those behavior expectations, we got to have the behavior expectations first before we can do PD over those. So you can look at it that way to be able to identify this as a priority. You identify what action steps or task is needed. Also critically important, who's responsible, document it, and then support, that allows there to be less confusion when you walk out of a meeting and say, I'm responsible for this very specific task. And then I have a goal date for getting that done. We're going to come back and we're going to review what that progress is. So I'm going to get in now looking at measuring intervention fidelity of interventions. And so this could be an area where maybe you have a little bit more knowledge and experience or interest, but ensuring that the interventions are delivered as intended. So again, fidelity interventions and practices, evaluation of if you're following the recipe. I don't know about you all, but there have been times where I have, baking especially, just a personal weakness of mine, but I thought that I had followed that recipe, and wouldn't you know it, it turned out terribly, right? So did I actually implement that recipe as intended? Probably not, because it didn't turn out very well. And so I need to go back and practice. I need to go back and see, what did I miss? Did I put sugar or did I put salt instead of sugar? What was my issue there? So we want to evaluate that recipe. So in keeping with this theme, on the left side, you've got something that we're all familiar with, the recipe from a recipe book, where we've got all the ingredients and the step-by-steps. We've even got pictures to show us how to dump things from one jar to another. But we often don't do that with our intervention protocols, if we even have an intervention protocol. And so on the right side of the screen, you've got a little snippet of an intervention protocol that we've worked with, just kind of your typical reading intervention, where we lay out, there's an overview of what this intervention is and when to use it. We have materials needed, and then the intervention steps complete with sample prompts, and this just really helps take any questions out of implementing this intervention as it's designed. So critically important there, especially if we have limited capacity to support our interventionist implementing these interventions. So we'll talk through the 5 elements of fidelity as well. So is there evidence that the intervention recipe was followed? So for each of these, you're wanting to ask some questions along with these. So adherence to plan, quality of delivery, student engagement, exposure, duration, and program specificity. So let's talk about each of those quickly as well. So adherence to the plan, this is answering that question, how well did we stick to the plan, curriculum, or assessment? Are the intervention and assessments delivered consistently across different teachers and different settings? I won't spend a lot of time on here because I'm keeping an eye on the clock, but I could also talk about the importance of, like we talked through the walkthrough tool. Are we delivering consistently across teachers? And often the answer is no. It can be very eye-opening if we do those walkthroughs. What are the evaluation methods? We can have checklists created from the intervention protocol and completed with observations or self-completed checklists. So I'm going to go back now a couple slides to that intervention protocol because I have here checklists created from that intervention protocol. If you're in a place where we're all tight on time, and so you're thinking, I just don't have the time to put into creating this fidelity inventory for this intervention, just take the intervention and take these steps. We have step 1 and step 2, and just turn that into a checklist. Did the teacher do this? Yes or no? Did the interventionist do this? Yes or no? And then go from there. Materials. Do we have the materials present? So it can be pretty simple if we start with a good foundation of having a good intervention protocol. So quality of delivery answers the questions. Does the interventionist have the necessary training, knowledge, and skills to deliver the intervention correctly? And how well is the intervention assessment or instruction delivered? And then also, are quality teaching practices used consistently and with appropriate intensity across all sessions or interventionists? All very critical questions to answer. We all know, though, it's not just on the adult in the intervention session. So we also want to take a look at student engagement. So we want to answer the question, how attentive and involved are the students in the intervention or activity? We all, I'm sure, have lots of experience where we put students who have some of the most challenging behaviors or lack of behavioral skills together in a group, and then we're like, all right, interventionists, good luck, teach them how to read. And oftentimes it just does not work very well, right? And so we want to be able to measure, are the students involved in the intervention, or is their behavior getting in the way of them improving in their reading skill or whatever intervention that we're working on? Okay, and then exposure and duration. Does the schedule allow for the intervention to be delivered for the recommended dosage? So the duration and frequency. Also, how often does a student receive the intervention? Is the student regularly attending school? Also critically important to consider as we're monitoring progress. And then did any other factors prevent the student from receiving the intervention as intended? So this is something that we should really be talking about in those data team meetings where we are reviewing progress monitoring data. And if the student is not progressing as well as we would expect, I don't know about you all, but in my experience, oftentimes we go immediately to blaming the student. Well, they must have a learning disability because they're not making progress. And we're doing the intervention, and we don't stop oftentimes to answer these questions truthfully. And sometimes we find out, you know what? They're tardy to school. They don't make their intervention session because it's at 9 o'clock in the morning and they don't get here until 10. And so being able to really pause as a part of this problem solving process, answer these questions to truly identify strengths and needs. So exposure and duration as well. We want to review that intervention schedule, observe intervention being conducted and note duration, and then review intervention logs to ensure it was implemented, the number of times it was intended to be implemented. So duration is important to look at for intervention dosage, and then also just the frequency. Oftentimes in interventions, when you look at the literature and things that support them, they're going to be talking about the frequency maybe being more important than duration. But if we're only implementing an intervention, we've got students blocked out for 30 minutes, but it takes 10 minutes to transition to and from, and we've got 10 minutes of intervention time, but we're dealing with Johnny who is having a hard time sitting still and being engaged in the intervention. And so really we're only getting like 4 or 5 minutes of good intervention time. Is that truly implementing the intervention as intended, or do we need to look at changing some things up to be able to support that? So thinking through each of these, really with a critical eye of not being critical on any person, but is the system that we're implementing working? And then also the program specificity. So we're answering the question here, how well is the intervention defined and different from other interventions? So if we're using the problem solving process to determine if the intervention was effectively matched to the identified problem. So you're going to have some phonemic awareness type of interventions that are specific to this type of skill that we might accidentally put in place. We're doing an intervention that's working on a skill that's different from what we are measuring or what we had identified that needs support. So again, I just want to show you an example of Fidelity checklist. It does not have to be lengthy. It does not have to be complicated. Super easy. Okay, so just create check boxes of criteria. And again, use your data to guide what your Fidelity checklist looks like. If you do, maybe you start large and you have a more in-depth Fidelity checklist and you're consistently hitting all of these points where you don't have an issue in this area, you can shorten it down and make it a little bit more brief. Just to kind of get us wrapping up here, if the intervention is not working, I want to leave you with this as well. If the intervention is not working, ask. Okay, we don't assume, like I said a minute ago, don't assume that is within a student issue. If there, do we have that intervention protocol in place? If not, then we need to get one, right? Don't make it too complicated. Is there a match between the target and the data collected to monitor progress? If not, it may explain that lack of progress, right? We may be measuring something that we're not intervening on. So to ensure high fidelity, we need to ensure staff have the appropriate training, the time, and the equipment so to be able to implement that intervention. And staff need to know that you are prioritizing it. If you, as a leader in the building, and you don't have to be, if I haven't said this already, if you're not an administrator, that's okay. You don't have to be an administrator to be a leader within your building in these things. So cheer on the staff that are doing things really well. Make sure that they know that you are placing a priority on the activity. And then finally, how do we continue to solve these fidelity issues? Let the interventionist know. Sometimes that's all it takes. All of us as educators, I believe, want the best for our students. And if there is something that I'm lacking, then I want to know so that I can change what I'm doing to create the best environment for my students to be successful. If they need training, provide it. That's pretty simple, right? But not necessarily easy to do all the time. My example where I talked about, I got to meet with the school psychologist and the interventionist together. That was because of advocacy. I said, listen, we've got some gaps here that we need to fill, and it took time to be able to actually make that happen. So you might need to advocate for additional training. And then finally, follow up. Never just do a one-time professional development, a one-time training, or say, hey, you didn't hit that point, get that next time, and then never go back. You've got to check back in to see if things have improved. But then also, importantly, to celebrate that success, celebrate that improvement, because we all need to continue to support each other within the school system. So with that, I will turn it back over to Benjamin and Dr. Shepard to close us out today. I went almost right up to our time today. So thank you, everybody, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you so much, Cade. That was a wonderful presentation. I love all of your real life from the field experiences and advice and the analogies. It brings me back to a time where I made this recipe. I had some people coming over to my house and I made this recipe and I worked so hard on it. It was a new recipe. And I failed to look at the details of it was apple cider that I was supposed to add, not apple cider vinegar. And I added apple cider vinegar. It was the nastiest thing I have ever tried. And it brought a good laugh. But, it's one of those times where that semantics matter. I also was consulting with a teacher once, and I went into assess fidelity, and we were working on behavior specific praise and limiting attention for undesired behavior. And the teacher's like, I've been doing a great job working so hard. Every time he throws something at me, I say, that was a good throw. And I'm like, that's not quite what we had in mind. And she was providing very behavior specific praise. She was praising very specific behaviors, just the wrong behaviors. And we had to go back to what are our behavior expectations and how do we redefine what we're doing. And so, you know, Fidelity is such a vast, you know, there's so many different ways to assess fidelity and so many different aspects of it. And I think you did an excellent job covering all of those different domains. So just thank you. Real quick, and we are at the end. If anybody needs to log off and head to their next thing, please do. But if anybody has any brief questions that they'd like to ask Cade, I'd like to allow that opportunity. Don't see any mics coming unmuted, so we'll, you know, go ahead and wrap up. But this is available for future viewing. So if anybody wants to share this or go back and reference things that were mentioned in the presentation, Benjamin, once we wrap this up, we'll upload this to our link tree. And so you'll be able to access it through the link tree. It will also be embedded into our course module on OK Connect. And so you'll be able to watch it through that. And Benjamin has linked that. And also, Benjamin, if you have the opportunity, can you add into the chat the OK Connect course that this is tied to? And I just want to thank everybody today for your attendance. And I want to thank you, Cade, for your presentation. Like I said, it was a wonderful presentation, very comprehensive, and we really appreciate your time and expertise. Our next community of practice will be on April 14th, the same time at 11 o'clock. And so we encourage you to continue. Oh, I clicked on the wrong thing. We encourage you to continue to attend our community of practices, and we look forward to seeing everyone then. So thank you, everyone. Bye, Cade.
Great to see you once again.